This episode of the Gladiator podcast is made possible by our generous supporters. Special thanks to our Hoplomachus and Gladiator tier patrons, like RecDeck. Support the show and become a patron today at patreon.com/secondright. Thank you. So, due to circumstances outside of my control, I've been thinking a lot about Monsters, Inc. lately, and specifically about Roz, the slug lady that's always getting on Mike Wazowski's case. And then I kind of realized that Roz is kind of like my gender identity goals. That's just how I want to be looking when I am in my 40s and 50s. And it's also the voice I want to have in my 40s and 50s.
That sounds dangerous.
It does. Yeah, honestly. Like, I don't want to do the things I would need to do in order to get there, but that's my end goal.
Well, welcome, everyone. We've had an interesting lead up, and you have heard the end of it. Did you know that Peeps are made by a Pennsylvania-based, like, kind of small candy company and just like sold everywhere due to really good marketing? Anyway, we are the Gladiator podcast, your place for Gladiator news and announcements.
As you could tell by everything's just been said. It turns out missing a host can really throw the energy into some wild directions.
Turns out, somehow Joker is the sensible one of this group. We just get overshadowed in some ways.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm UFO. Someone else say something.
Seismic Lawns?
There we go.
I'm Seismic Lawns.
And I'm Violet Blight. We're here to ostensibly talk about Control as an archetype in Gladiator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'll also talk about other stuff. Probably this is already so off the rails. But
actually, we are going to be talking about Control, but I think we've made it somewhat of at least the last episode made it kind of a section of let's talk about the news of Gladiator and like what's happening soon. That I think we should start with that again this time around. And
okay, I got some news for you.
Do you?
Yes. I took high roll means to a 4-1 finish yesterday in the tournament.
Oh yeah, I was able to be at the tournament yesterday, and I hear Mono White did well with one deck, and I think the other Mono White players didn't do as well.
Yeah. I nearly got the first place in 5-0 with my Immersion Ultimatum channel pet deck. 4-0 into the final round, faced up against Mono White, took it to game 3, and then lost in a very close match. Yeah, I lost top 3 to Blue White Control by 2/3%.
Oh no.
UFO, you seem to have this tradition of losing out from a milestone of placement by an extremely small amount.
Ninth place in the Gladiator games the week before was another 4-1 on Gruul midrange. Went to second tiebreakers, which I believe were also really close.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think I was within a percent or two of my opponent there.
But I mean, fourth place is also still a really good finish.
I mean, it's also still a 4-1. I really can't go.
Yeah.
There's only one way to do better than that, and I was given the opportunity.
Yeah. I went 0-2 drop and played Hollow Knight for 5 hours.
I mean, that was ostensibly a good plan. You're very good at that game, and I enjoyed watching you do it.
Yeah, no, it was good.
But,
right. There was
yes.
a Selesnya control list. I remember seeing, I assume it was Supreme Phantom.
It was Supreme Phantom.
Yeah. Yeah, that list, I remember looking at it because I saw the title and was like, wait, did they mislabel midrange? And no, they didn't.
No, it's
a control deck.
My honest take is, I think... sorry, go ahead.
If anyone's going to take a color pairing that isn't traditionally associated with control and make a control deck that's better than most others, it's going to be Supreme Phantom.
Indeed. And I think, honestly, I think that particular list, if I was looking at it, had a few rough edges that I would see reason to polish out, like lack of Questing Beast, which, if you didn't know, is a 2 green for a 4/4 legendary creature type beast, vigilance, death touch, and haste. Questing Beast cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Damage dealt by creatures control cannot be prevented. When Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, deal that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls. Very good card.
It's planeswalker removal and creature removal.
And player removal eventually.
Yes, indeed. And just, there's, obviously, I think Supreme Phantom has been absent from the format for a little while. They came and won a few things, just showed their chops as just a very powerful control player within the format. And I think honestly, sorry, tripping on my words. This might just be a case where they're coming back into the format and wanting to try something a little different from the Sultai, Bant, and otherwise traditional control list that they are known for, but still stay a little bit in the comfort zone.
Yeah. Supreme Phantom definitely thrives in control archetypes, and I think honestly it's a fun return to form for them to be coming back into the tournament scene with a control deck that's very much outside of the sphere of what we're used to, but also still coming back to a side of control that we were used to seeing a few months ago in all
the Wraths control deck.
Like all the Wraths and really good blue and or green finishers. Like Bant control is definitely a deck that is great to play and has seen a lot of success in the past, and I like this as almost a kind of nod to it.
Yeah, I might have to give this list a few plays.
Yeah, or some version of the list at least, right?
Yeah. I'm definitely gonna mess around with something like this because I've been meaning to put together green white, and this is my jam.
I believe it was missing Fateful Absence, which I think is just a wild card consideration.
Yeah, that seems like just not having one, because that card's very good here.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think the sort of introduction and just sort of exploration of
this deck gets to play Farewell. Yeah, no, okay, I'm in.
Yep.
Because you ramp to it. Yeah, okay, I'm in.
So
we also
this
have
is a very
other
interesting. Oh, okay, go ahead.
In that we have 3 preview cards that are coming, I believe, late in the month, and along with the rest of 30 cards for Alchemy. Wait, oh wow, we're getting it in less than a week. Okay.
4 days apparently.
God, okay. So we have seen 3 of the cards that are coming out in the next 4 days. So have we seen a 4th one now?
Wait, there's a 4th?
Yeah, okay. So let's go starting with the card I think most excited about, which is Kami of Bamboo Groves. This is a single green for an enchantment creature, Spirit. And when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. And it also has a channel ability where you can pay 2 and a green and discard it to conjure 2 cards named Forest into your hand. So this one, interestingly, even if you're playing like a lot of snow-covered basics, channeling this gets you completely regular, normal basics.
Which is a side grade? Question mark?
Yeah. I think this card really interests me because it takes the things that are good about Arboreal Grazer, except for its stat line. And
yeah, 1/1's awkward.
Yeah, 1/1 is definitely worse than 0/3 with Reach. But to replace that, it keeps a lot more relevance in the late game if you can't use the enters the battlefield ability, where you can still essentially discard it to get a cultivate when you're in the late game, because you're going to still be able to use it as a cultivate.
Mm-hmm. I am, I have a very weird opinion on channel cards, which is this is a 1-drop and such. The channel doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
I don't know how to feel about this card right now because I don't think it slots into a lot of the stuff that Grazer slots into.
No, it's 1/1 3.
But yeah, it is also an enchantment for 1 that lets you ramp. So there's going to be stuff you can do with that.
I legitimately think that there is a green-white Enchantress deck to be made in the format, and this would definitely work within it.
Yeah, there's definitely something in there.
This is an easy way to ramp while also maintaining board presence in a deck that really wants to get up to 4 mana quickly so that it can play cards that do frankly not that much while still impacting the board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And our next card is Better Offer, I believe.
Yes.
Do you have a better offer on this card?
I mean, I think as long as you can get more mana, you can get a better offer because it's an X spell, specifically
Yes.
X and a blue for a sorcery that puts a random creature card with mana value X or less from target opponent's library onto the battlefield under your control. It perpetually has base power and toughness XX and perpetually gains ward 1.
So I want to talk a little bit, even before we talk about what the card actually means, about the digital differences that this card creates that I really appreciate and like, which is a random creature card from a library into play. To make this work in paper, you'd have to do a cascade sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Effectively, it would be just cascade from your opponent's library until you hit X, until you hit something that fits the requirements.
Or it'd be a bribery effect, and searching through the library makes it a much more powerful card.
Indeed. But the use of random, the use of just the way that this is, first of all, it doesn't shuffle the library, and also doesn't have the ability to be controlled by scries or otherwise. It just will be there.
Effie, it does need to. I think it only would work.
Yeah, notably.
Yeah, you wouldn't hit anything if X equals 0.
Yes.
You need to pay the mana value first.
Notably, talking about whether or not this is 1 blue mana, take a creature out of your opponent's deck and kill it. Which is not the case. It's a little bit less powerful than that interpretation.
Yeah, it's honestly, this card is just strange.
Yeah, it's really strange. There was conversation, and I think I agree with it, on there is legitimate potential that people are going to start being worried about better off for X equals 2. Maybe not even legit for any legitimate reason other than cowardice, I'd say, and put more 2-drops into their Thassa's Oracle decks. Because
notably, it is X or less. So if they have a 1-drop or a 2-drop creature, it can still grab something. But having
I don't know that you'd really need to play around this in a Thoracle deck, anyways.
Yeah,
and like you just bounce the Oracle and use it yourself, or like you use a Jace Wielder, or like you just don't care and you kill them. Right?
Yeah.
It does not
better offer
really matter as much as I feel like it matters.
I think better offer presents an interesting question of, is a creature that's like on rate of like XX for X, does it care? Is 1 mana for Ward 1 worth it in that instance? And I don't think it is. But I think it also has the interesting application to take cards that not necessarily are needed in your opponent's deck, but that are being played for more than just their stat line.
I don't think this card is good. Let me just say that to start. But I think it starts some very interesting conversations about whether or not a combo deck, especially a combo control deck, should be running more creatures. And my answer is almost always yes.
Yeah.
Even if you're heavy on Wraths. I probably will never cut like Gilded Goose from my Sultai decks, even when I'm playing more Wraths than the 2 I'm currently able to play without feeling self-conscious. Just give me Damnation on Arena and I'll be very happy.
Damnation would be so nice.
And
they already gave us Wrath and Day of Judgment.
Yeah, Day of Judgment. A new alchemy.
Yeah. Just give us Damnation.
Yes.
We just want Damnation. That's all we want. And
it's most of what we want.
There's one other card that I think actually is potentially the most interesting of the bunch. Or
the most interesting design,
its
I'd
application
say,
for our format. It's Dragonfly Pilot, which is a single white mana for a 1/1 Fox Pilot. And when it enters the battlefield, you conjure a card named Dragonfly Suit into your hand. And then Dragonfly Pilot crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. And just for reminder's sake, if people don't remember the commons of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty already, it's a 2 and a white vehicle that is a 3/2 with flying and crews for 1.
Honestly, the Dragonfly Pilot is just kind of not. It's really lowering expectations with the Dragonfly suit. It can crew 3 Dragonfly suits at once.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels a little awkward that they give it the ability to crew higher when it also only gets a thing that it can already crew.
But I think that's like a pilot thing in Neon Dynasty, that the pilots are better at crewing things.
I think all of the pilots in the main set either have some extra synergy with vehicles or have that specific line of text. And I know the tokens, the pilot tokens of the set do.
Yeah.
I like this in mono white if we get in the space where the format as a whole is slightly slower. For
it draws
any
a card.
particular reason. Because it draws a card, and more specifically, it draws a card that makes stabilizing after a Wrath much easier.
Yeah, it draws a card. Just you better be okay with that card being exactly Dragonfly Suit, because that's what card it draws.
Yeah.
In I mean, there are worse cards, but
yeah, like I honestly, this is much worse than drawing a card, especially because Dragonfly Suit isn't an actual creature. But I do like this as a way to say, okay, once I have my board inevitably hit by a Day of Judgment, even when that happens, any creature that I draw is an immediate 3 damage that needs to be dealt with in some way.
Also, is the Dragonfly Pilot actually getting into the top of a Dragonfly suit? That doesn't...
It looks vaguely similar.
It looks similar, but it doesn't look like the art in Dragonfly suit.
Yeah.
It looks like maybe a slightly painted, a differently painted version, question mark?
Yeah, I think it's a different paint. It's a differently painted Dragonfly suit that's like not powered on.
And also doesn't have the head. I think...
Yeah.
Because like there's like a very obvious head, and the head is not there.
Yeah.
Like, or the head is much smaller than in the Dragonfly suit art that we see. Because maybe that's the head, but that's a very small head.
Yeah. Yeah. I
also this pilot isn't a dragonfly. I call shenanigans.
It's got 4 wings.
No, the pilot.
Oh, fair. Fair.
Actually, yeah, that's worth noting that this is one of the few creatures I think that we get where it looks like it is set up for
the creature type thing.
Yeah, creature type is same as the name, which is the same as like how it plays out. This defeats that expectation in literally every way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then brings the expectation back by making a Dragonfly suit card into your just appear in your hand.
Yeah. Speaking of bringing back expectations,
we're talking about control again?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I'm hearing from production that we have a new card to talk about that I don't know about.
Yeah, it was just shown.
That's the power of the internet.
Also, the power of we are now exactly dating this this recording session to exactly when Kami of Morning was spoiled. 2 and a black for a 3/2 spirit. Whenever Kami of Morning enters the battlefield, target creature you control or creature card in your graveyard perpetually gains. Whenever a creature you control with greater mana value than this card dies, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped.
So,
interesting.
Vanifar
so you're getting
exists.
All of our immediate first impressions on this.
Yeah, I have just read this card.
I think this is actually just really good in either like mono black aggro or...
Oh, it slaps in mono black.
Well, you put it on the Kami of Morning, and then when your 4-drops die, you put it on. You put the ability on something else, and the Kami of Morning still has the ability.
Oh God!
And I honestly think that's like a pretty medium case scenario, and I think in specifically a mono black aggro sense, I'm thinking putting this on a really good 2-drop so that when the Kami of Morning dies, I'm still getting back a very powerful card, like a Tainted Adversary that I can then immediately use.
Give me back my Blade of the Oni.
You could put it on to a mirror image in your graveyard, or mirror image like effect. Right? It comes in, it copies a thing with more CMC than 3 that can sacrifice itself, and now you have an infinite loop.
Yeah, and honestly, this is
gonna go infinite in ways that I haven't thought about.
I mean,
is legitimately like a Vanifar style card.
No, this with Vanifar, a corridor monitor, and then another sack outlet lets you just...
I mean, do you need a sack outlet? You can just put it... You can just make it copy a legendary creature with an enter the battlefield ability.
Oh,
with
God,
4
right.
CMC or more.
Yeah, never
so
mind.
What you do is so you Kami of Morning, it targets itself. You then sacrifice it to Vanifar. You grab a 4-drop. You then sacrifice the 4-drop because it's breaching Hippocamp, I think.
Hippocamp, yeah.
Yeah, it's breaching Hippocamp, which then... Oh, it's awkward, actually.
It's awkward.
It's much more awkward than I was thinking.
Yeah.
Well, you can sacrifice the breaching Hippocamp. It brings back the Kami of Mourning. The Kami of Mourning targets... I mean, you don't actually really even need to target Kami of Mourning with this ability. You just need to target...
you can target the breaching Hippocamp then.
You can
target the breaching...
go
in the graveyard.
I'm sure there is... I think if I sit down for like an hour and think about this, I'll be able to come back with an answer. Give me like a day or two.
Yeah, this is one that
at the very least
gonna break something, but we need to have time to figure out why.
Very core to this, and Kami of Mourning hitting Glasspool Mimic in the graveyard is going to be a thing that happens more often than not.
Yeah, I also think unironically this just makes Vannifar comboing trivially easy.
Somehow it has to.
Well, it has to.
So the line is just this: once you sacrifice once you get a 5 that can be sacrificed instantaneously in any way, you can go infinite.
Do we have any 5s that work like that?
Yes, we at the very least have Young Necromancer, and we have...
Young Necromancer requires to tap, which means it needs to be unsummoning sick.
Well, Young Necromancer, you exile 2 cards from your graveyard, which brings back Breaching Hippocamp,
right, sorry,
which untaps Vannifar.
Yeah. Gotcha, wrong one. I forgot that this was a card that we got that only works in this format and only in this situation.
Yeah. I think we have better ones as well now.
I don't believe you.
I don't remember.
I don't know if we do, honestly.
But even just going Kami of Mourning, target a Hyrax Tower Scout, and then
Kami of Mourning, target
you can
Kami of Mourning, I think is a good
Kami
start.
of Mourning, and then you go infinite, grabbing Breaching Hippocamp, and then you can get any number of 5+.
Yeah,
you.
This card's gonna kill people.
Yeah, you can do something with this card.
And then even past the combo potential, right? It's just really makes at least one thing really hard to get rid of.
Yeah. No, like this, like, I mean, we mentioned the just putting this ability on a 2-drop and just making it impossible to get rid of.
Yeah. And then putting it on itself is also, I think, a really powerful play.
Allow ourselves to bring back a Croxa whenever something 3 or greater dies. Or like, you know, stuff like that.
So Kami of Mourning is very appealing to me right now, at the very least, just because my last really notable game with mono black aggro, I was able to recur a 6/1 Skyclave Shade like 5 turns in a row.
6/1?
Because it got bigger from a Sap Vitality, which gave it perpetually +3/+0.
Oh, God.
So it was this creature that what always needed to be dealt with before it could attack from a control deck. And if if you don't happen to have exile removal handy, you always have to do it. And so the Skyclave Shade ended up being a 5-for-1.
Yeah,
you hate to see that as a control deck. You really do.
Yeah, you hate to see it as a control deck, and you love to see it as a mono black player. And so seeing a card that lets you turn any play that's gas into also a way that if you get rid of it, I'm going to get back another powerful creature. I think that's really effective. Speaking of things you'll hate to see as a control deck, we should talk about control, because that's what this episode is about.
Is it, though? Is it,
Well,
though?
that's hopefully what the rest of the episode is about, unless they preview a new card on us just like that.
I mean...
I think there's another round of whatever event is happening before we get another card and have to stop to talk about it.
Yeah, we have at least like an hour.
If I may share, I actually started my foray into this format back nearly 2 years ago now, playing Esper Control. It was a very bad version of Esper Control. I was playing too few lands and too many things that were bad, like Unmoored Ego, because I was convinced that I needed to answer Omniscience decks. There weren't any Omniscience decks.
Well, there were. It's
Eventually,
just
there became
you were
Omniscience
also
decks.
playing all of the Omniscience decks.
No.
Yeah.
That came later.
This was real
this was
early
back
days.
when like Wheeler was
this was back
pushing
when Wheeler was
blue-white
pushing
Omniscience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was back when you submitted your deck lists via Discord channel.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And they had to be, I think, hand
Checked
verified.
Out. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't miss those days.
I think we both said the same thing, but slightly different. Anyway, unsurprisingly, my 32 land Esper Control deck did not do very well. And
okay, those were the good days. Never mind.
Where no one was playing the correct number of lands.
Actually, I counter that point. I found a bunch of old deck lists from Violet here, and not once were they playing the wrong number of lands. Like, kudos to Violet. I believe you had experience in the quote-unquote predecessor in Historic Highlander.
I had a very little amount of it, which was like enough that I wasn't building decks completely blind. Yeah,
enough to know that you should be playing 38 lands in most decks.
Yeah. I had just enough to figure that out, which was enough to get me ahead at the beginning.
I think conversely, a lot of people, myself included, were coming hot off the tails from online Canadian Highlander.
Yeah, and Canadian Highlander players are degenerates.
A lot of the community was from Canlander, and Canlander
is going so fast that
such a different
aggro
format.
Plays like barely 30 lands, maybe.
Yeah, I mean aggro also gets access to Mox Ruby, so
yes,
which was why,
and doesn't have to play 3-drops.
Yeah,
no, just don't. You don't need to play 3-drops. It would be incorrect to play 3-drops. Because you have 5 effective copies of Lightning Bolt in your deck, or some number like that. You also still have Price of Progress, even though you need to be slightly aware of the fact that it is a cost in that format. No. Anyway, Control. Even though I started out building it wrong, Control has pretty storied history in Gladiator, and going forward, it has kind of evolved quite a bit as the rest of the field changes. Early on in Gladiator, people were much more battle cruiser and otherwise kind of late game sort of get to my big thing and then play my big thing sort of magic. And the control decks that were in that time frame, while good then, would be kind of out of place now, even against other control lists, where the sort of split of answers really does change based on the things needing to be answered. Surprise, surprise. Though some things are just kind of constants. You have your wraths, you've got your interaction, and you got your end game.
Although I think we were much worse off in the world of wraths than we are today.
Yep. We had Cleansing Nova.
Yeah, we had Cleansing Nova. Eventually we got Umagate, and
I mean, when I built Esper Control, we had Cleansing Nova.
Yeah, Cleansing Nova and by technicality Settle the Wreckage, which is barely a Wrath.
We have an infinite number more of 4-mana Wraths than we did back then because we had 0 at that time. And like that addition has really cemented white-based control as the destroy creature control deck. Even like really actually pretty early on into the summer of 2020 when we got a bunch of white-based Wraths back to back. Wrath of God came very quickly, Day of Judgment right almost immediately afterwards. Not almost immediately, but pretty soon afterwards. Fumigate in that same drop.
And then the next standard set after we got Day of Judgment, we got Doomscar.
Oh, yes. There actually were 2 mono white Wraths. Do you remember which the one that no one plays anymore? No.
So Settle is one that I'm hesitant to actually. Oh, Shatter the Sky.
Yes, Shatter the Sky.
Oh my god,
Shatter the Sky.
You got it.
Oh, the Theros Beyond Death special, and how when Wrath of God was printed.
Yeah.
When Wrath of God was
people probably
Arena,
still play it,
people
but they
were
really
still
shouldn't.
playing Shatter the Sky, and it was correct at that point to still be playing Shatter the Sky because we still only had like
3 Wraths.
Or 3 actual Wrath effects at that point. And
Shatter does have some, corner cases.
Yeah,
but I mean, personally, I think that I don't really want my mono green opponent drawing a card because of their 3-drop.
Yeah.
I think Control also had a different space of not just how many Wrath it had, but also kind of by extension the proportion of what it was playing. So Control had a lot more cards that were dedicated to being win conditions.
And notably, you still do play Shatter the Sky if you're out of other Wraths to play, right?
Yeah. Shatter the Sky is your worst 4-mana Wrath and one of the worst Wraths to play.
It's in a way worse than the 5-mana Wraths in some situations, but it really depending on your choices, it can also be just fine.
Yeah.
And that is honestly, if I may, a kind of choice that a lot of control decks kind of have to make when choosing your colors is not just how do I remove creatures, how do I interact with my opponent, but also how do I clean up the board. The available sweepers really have made this sort of split in control lists where usually you have base blue with typically some version of black or white for the white's really good ability to remove creatures in Wraths and the removal that exists, and black's okay ability to remove creatures in Wraths and less good removal, but also the addition of hand attack that can remove creatures preemptively.
I think it's also black also has the ability, especially recently, to have better ways to, once it's stabilized, close out a game while still playing controlling cards.
And then you have
whether that be in the form of cards that just are really powerful value engines that also kill things like Professor Onyx, or if it's in another card from Strixhaven, Tainted Pact, being able to kind of close out the game in an instant.
And, just generally speaking, control decks don't really need to care much about how the game is going to be won, because a lot of the early game is focusing on how you don't lose. And once you figured out that question, you can then ask the question of, okay, now that I'm not losing, how am I winning?
Yeah, and I think especially recently, one of the biggest developments that Control has been able to make is that it doesn't need to play win conditions anymore, really. And it can focus a lot more on making sure that it doesn't die in the early game, because the cards that make it survive the early game are also the cards that later on in the game finish and close out the game. Cards, especially with adventures.
Yeah,
cards
adventures
like,
or
Brazen Borrower and Brazen Borrower is actually kind of the standout in its class. And a card that I would like to actually add to the list of wraths that we forgot about, Cast Off on Realm Cloaked Giant.
Oh, yes.
Which
God.
I used to saw play for that. The first time in a while.
I remember
the other
that.
Day.
I remember when I just was very into that card, and yeah,
and then
that sure was
got by my Crystalline Giant.
What happened in 2020? Oh, I thought you were going to go Bone Crusher, not Crystalline Giant.
Well, you see, Crystalline Giant was Mecha Godzilla, and you always forget that it's actually a giant.
Yeah. It was also one of the first crafts people were recommended back in 2020 in the format.
I mean, it's still not bad.
It's not bad.
I still play it in a staggering number of decks for how much better creatures have generally gotten in that time span.
Yeah. It was Crystalline Giant and Stone Coil Serpent. And like those were the two things that everyone jammed.
Yep. And you still play Stone Coil Serpent. Crystalline Giant is a little less so because now that we have Lightning Bolt, the 3 toughness is a little bit hard to protect.
Yeah. And
good old Lightning Bolt Swords to Plowshares format.
I still like playing Crystalline Giant, especially on a more tap out control kind of opponent, because a slower control opponent is still going to be playing bolt and swords and things of that nature. But sometimes they'll be tapped out. I slam down a Crystalline Giant. I roll well and get hexproof the first time. And suddenly it's a card that needs a wrath all to itself.
Yeah, and even honestly, Crystalline Giant just as a thing against control, you do need to answer this card pretty quickly, or else it's not going to ever be able to be blocked by anything you got.
Yeah, it's
Crystalline Giant is very snowbally.
Yeah, especially again if it rolls hexproof on its first ability that it gets, because an opponent an opponent that says, I'm not expecting anything that I can't deal with on my after I untap. Crystalline Giant is one of those creatures that is just the amount of time you have to kill it before it could potentially become effectively unkillable without cards that you really want to save for other occasions is faster than almost any other card in the game.
Yep. Honestly, I think with what we were talking about, we're just talking about realizing that Crystalline Giant is probably a little underplayed at the moment, huh?
I mean, it's not underplayed by me.
Well, I mean, I haven't played in a while.
I haven't thought about it in actual months.
But yeah, just the fact that it is this powerful of a card without having any color requirements, especially in decks that have more strict color requirements otherwise, can be really just a breath of fresh air. And having that type of threat means that you often get time to find your colors for your other stuff. Right?
Yeah.
And the time is definitely one of the biggest sort of through points of control in my experience, where you're always looking to figure out where you are both in the grand scheme of a game. Are you past the point that you're needing to stabilize? Have you stabilized? Where in the time frame of this game are you? And some of the best control players in our format and just in general are able to very quickly recognize when, where, and how they need to interact with this timing. So talking about timing, let's talk about a control card that no, it's not even a control card. Let's talk about a card. The card is called Exclude.
The card Exclude's an interesting one. I haven't seen it played in a while, and
it's an interesting card where what you should do with it is right on the box.
Every time I see it played, I feel UFO groaning, even though he's all the way across the country.
Yeah.
You see, it's a card that if you just look at the times it is actually cast, it looks like the best card in your deck. But that's only ignoring the fact that you had to get to a point where you're actually able to cast it.
Yeah, because the number of times where this is just going to sit in your hand when your opponent casts Planeswalker after Planeswalker, or just beats you down with a Lovestruck Beast or a Yorvo or whatever, right?
Lightning bolt targeting you.
If they're on the play, they get their 3-drop out before you can counter it, and the 3-drops in this format are messed up nowadays.
I also think that's
recently. I'm sorry. Do you?
Yeah, I'd like to. I think in general, creature counters are not that useful in this format because there's a good number of decks that don't run a significant number of creatures, but every deck runs a significant number of non-creature spells.
The only thing I'd say in general would be Reject, hitting creatures and planeswalkers, is versatile enough to also potentially get into a deck, because also not 3 mana, which is another problem with Exclude. Reject being 1 in the blue for a mana leak effect, counter unless they pay 3 for a creature or planeswalker, and then also exiles?
It exiles it, yeah.
Which makes it better against things like Uro, which is very rare.
Uro, or half of Mono Black's threats, or if your opponent's playing Sultai Pact and they have rewrotes for their Thoracle.
Man. Could you imagine if we got mana leak?
I can't imagine
I hadn't even considered that possibility.
Mana Leak's one of the cards I was banking on to be in the Mystical Archive.
The same goes for
Vindicate. I wish Vindicate were in.
I do want Vindicate, actually. That would be
I'm still mad we got D-Spark instead of Vindicate.
D-Spark is,
We got Stone Rain instead of Vindicate, really.
Oh, yeah. Didn't even get Pillage.
Just straight up Stone Rain, the worst of the Stone Rains.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting how, you name an effect after a card? No. Stone Rain is the worst of the Stone Rains because it's the 3 mana land removal. Demolish is not a worse Stone Rain because it's not a Stone Rain. It's a Demolish.
That's fair. Okay. It's actually in a completely lower league. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Somehow. Yeah.
And
sorry, Ponza players, but you know what happened.
I mean, if they print Minvuli Acid Moss into Arena, I'm playing it.
Actually, I could be into that.
4 mana to remove a land of your opponents and search out any forest. That's fixing.
JB is
that gets triumphs.
The person that keeps us on track, and I just want to say, Acid Moss is one of my favorite cards of all time, exclusively because it was in the like Magic Origins version of Magic Duels, and it completely ruined the Magic Duels meta.
That terrible client. So can you imagine a client where you're only allowed 1 mythic, 2 rares, 3 uncommons, and 4 commons in your deck that you need to open paid packs to create?
I arrived into Magic right before Duels was discontinued, and I have like half an hour played of it on Steam, and I do not regret moving away from it immediately.
But can you imagine that a card like Acid Moss at common would be very powerful, because it really shouldn't be a common, and you can play 4 of it in your deck.
It also shouldn't have been on Duels.
I mean,
how did that end up in?
Listen, they did weird things in the early not arena Magic formats.
Frankly, they're doing weird things still, but
different
this
weird
is one
things.
of my favorite.
At the very least, arena can actually play Magic.
If you think people got annoyed about the extra turn decks that have been on arena, you have not seen the people who complained about one volley Acid Moss in Duels. It's an absolute riot.
Didn't Magic 2014 have 2015? 2014, I think. Have like just a straight up Time Warp deck? Like
one of them. I think that might have been 2013.
I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like, actually.
Magic Duels.
I only play those games for their puzzles anymore. The puzzles are fun.
How did we get here?
Yes.
Exclude, right.
Yes. Bad cards that shouldn't be played.
Yeah. Acid Moss is not one. And why is Time Warp up? Time Warp's not a bad card.
Well, I was talking about Time Warp.
Yeah, we were briefly talking about literal actual Time Warp, which we did get.
I was going to have to throw Virtual Hands.
But I think that Time Warp does actually go into a aspect of control that we want to talk about, which is compounding advantage. Oftentimes you'll see that in the form of card advantage, where 1-for-1 removal is used sparingly, and they're looking to hit, multiple creatures with a wrath or any other sort of ways to get up on cards, whether that be draw spells or otherwise. And that is a compounding advantage. Another compounding advantage that like a Time Warp in a control deck can do is to give you an extra tick on all your planeswalkers, an extra attack on something, so that's less likely in control.
I shudder to believe what... Actually, I want to see more folks playing Wilderness Reclamation again, just because I think Time Warp with Wilderness Reclamation is one of those things that I need to see. Just to feel something.
Yeah, I ended up playing Wilderness Reclamation a bit more recently. I have a function in my stream where people can submit effectively a deck doctor sort of request, and I got a Simic Tempo, control list, and Wilderness Reclamation was in the deck. Exclude was in the deck, and as per my rules, I could not change that fact. So I've been the most recently played Exclude of probably most people in Gladiator at the moment, I hope. Didn't draw the card, but that doesn't matter. It was there, and I knew it was there.
Yeah, and once a control deck has kind of achieved that snowballing of the advantage.
Wilderness Reclamation advantage, that sort of stuff. Wilderness Reclamation is very good at snowballing.
It's so great. It turns out getting double mana is great. Actually, I'm going to stop you here because we brought up Reclamation, and I am grabbing multiple soapboxes to yell to the masses.
If I may quote before you go too crazy.
Sure.
There was a experiment done by one Cat Muzi a little while ago of playing, I think, Jund Reclamation. And the big takeaway was, and I quote, "Playing this deck has led me to believe nothing other than Wilderness Reclamation is a mono blue card, and that is it."
Yes. Yeah. It is.
Yes.
It is. Yeah. God, I fucking... Oh, I swear. We get one.
We're PG-13.
Yeah, we get one. And I'm using it on Wilderness Rec. I love this card that's so fair. Much.
That's fair.
I'm definitely up there in terms of people who have cast or played this card. Because I don't know, something about the stuff you get to do with it speaks to me, and it's very good at snowballing. Like I was part of the temporary Reclamation Revolution where we just shoved it in all sorts of control decks. Good old Is It Rec. Those were the good days. Okay.
I mean, it worked in the time frame. Like at the time, it worked very well.
At the time, it worked too, which is the best part. Like we just played Reclamation and also sometimes like an Uro and
we just got Lightning Bolt, so like red-based control was pretty powerful.
It was in the times before aggro really took off, and being able to play the control game with red removal and then also just have rec to be able to snowball was the best thing to be doing, or one of the best things.
And it also just highlighted the power potential of an Is It control deck versus the other options that we talked about, because we talked about blue-white, we talked about blue-black, but blue-red does also have wraths. There are red wraths. We have a bunch of them. In fact, most of the efficient ones are actually in red.
Yeah, like they're
Anger the Gods, Sweltering Suns, Storm's Wrath, Devastation, Burn Down the House now.
I need to play Burn Down the House at some point. There's also there are a decent number of good red wraths. There are also some more questionable red wraths that,
I mean, if you want to call them wraths.
I don't.
If you call Draconic Intervention a wrath,
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a pirate wrath.
Your house.
What's the pirate wrath?
Fiery Cannonade?
Fiery Cannonade.
Yeah.
It was something about cannons.
Give me that flame sweep.
If it deals
now we're talking
damage
magic
to each creature, it doesn't count.
Unless it's a pyroclasm, and then it does.
Yeah. God, I wish we had pyroclasm on Arena. That would do so much for me.
We need another mystical archive.
Archive, Pyroclasm.
I would be so into that. Just give us 20 different arts of Pyroclasm. Thanks.
I mean, they did Thalia already. How many arts of Thalia on Arena?
Like 7?
4 plus
no, 6. It's
2
6.
plus another 2.
Is there another one?
Well, the new one from the new Innistrad set.
There's the secret layer, which is
there's
4.
The 4 secret layers.
There's the Innistrad, the original Innistrad, or wherever it was actually. That was in a historic anthology.
It was either 1 or 2. It was way back when.
Yeah, that's 1. There's Crimson Vow, which is another 1, and then there's is there 2? 1 or 2 alternate.
There's at least one all art in Crimson Vow. There's also the Parallax version of original Thalia, which I actually do count as an additional art because it has additional things to it.
That is fair. Oh, yeah. Okay. There's also
yes, they do have Mina Harker as your Thalia on Arena. I'm pretty sure.
That's the other one I was thinking about
on there somewhere.
And then like the no color version of Thalia. There's so many Thalias.
So, man,
there are
the double feature Thalia looks
Thalias
good.
On Arena, and
I'm gonna be honest. If they gave us a way to just get the double feature art style on cards,
just pay for it.
I would be so into that. I would probably not really like get many because it would be expensive enough that I couldn't really. But God, I love these so much.
I got double feature basic lands, thinking that those would be my basic lands for a while, and then Kamigawa New and Dynasty came out, and like those became
and
my
now
basic
new
lands.
Capenna's gonna come out.
Yeah,
why are they so good at making basic art all of a sudden? They were so bad at it for so long.
Yeah, we went from not having a lot of great options to only having great options.
They do it every set now, and I mean, like it sells. It makes sense, and I'm not complaining.
Also, I believe this is one of the few arts we do not have.
Yeah,
this is
that's
like
exclusive
F&M
to
promo.
I think it's a Judge promo and also on MitGo.
It's
WMC qualifier. It says. I think it might have been
that's
World Match Cup qualifier question mark.
Yeah, that's what it would be.
Which was in 2015 apparently.
So specifically with that art, it's you either for a paper version you had to go to a World Magic Cup qualifier. For getting it on Modo or MitGo or whatever you want to call it, you had to watch a stream of a MitGo tournament, and then you had to somehow connect your MitGo account to Twitch in some way. I can't remember how.
Twitch drop?
It was a pre-Twitch drop essentially. It was very much tied to a MitGo tournament. The only reason I know about it is because that's how I got one, and then I stopped playing MitGo.
I mean, it seems like you won at MitGo.
I don't think I have it.
Because, and I think that might be money now.
I don't think it is.
I mean, listen, anything you can get from MitGo is money, because MitGo is fake Monopoly cards that shouldn't have any value anyway.
MitGo is money in the same way that it's not. MitGo is money in the same way that money is money, in which case it's all fake.
Hot take, MitGo cards are original NFTs.
Oh no, I was gonna say it, but I didn't want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cards on MitGo are one of the many things that we don't need NFTs to do.
Yeah. I mean, but the speculative market is the same. Actually the same.
Yeah.
That's Magic cards for you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
now
that we've started talking about #MTG Finance.
Isn't it fun to just absolutely recoil at something that's just too toxic to even consider?
Oh no, Joker really is the one that anchors us.
Yeah. So
I have not stopped smiling.
Neither have I.
Gear us back to Control and talk about how Control actually finishes games.
Immersion Ultimatum. That's the only way you finish a game, right?
Oh, you just flung me back to 2020.
What are you talking about?
Apparently that's where we live now.
Yesterday. I was doing that yesterday.
WinCons in Control. We started off by focusing on a lot of cards that really only served as win conditions. And some of those have still made it to Control lists today. But now we have more cards that function both or function either as a win condition or /and as a way to answer some sort of threat in the early or mid game. So in a sense, a lot of Control win conditions are cards that you would already be playing if they weren't Control win conditions. But they also happen to win the game. And this is especially true of your more expensive planeswalkers, like your 5 mana Teferi, which is a card that both answers your opponent's threats and also puts you in a position to close out a game very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And as the formats continued, we've been trending towards more efficient costing for control win conditions, i.e. we've been sort of moving a little bit, I'm not saying entirely, but a little bit away from the Dream Trawlers of the world, more into, say, God Eternal Kefnets.
God Eternal Kefnet's such a great card.
God Eternal Kefnet is like...
I feel responsible for the adoption of God Eternal Kefnet.
I was going to do it anyways,
a champion of it for so long.
You definitely pushed it a lot.
I am so proud of Kefnet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does a bird has such a big glow up from being a very weird god and fringe god in Amonkhet to being just the most efficient card in War of the Spark?
Mm-hmm. Look, all I'm saying is Lazotep is blue, so it makes sense that he'd get the biggest buff. I'm not sure what saying that meant at all, but I sure have said it now.
I'll agree.
Sure have.
Look, it's canon now. You can't stop me.
Yep.
Wizards hire me.
Sense.
We can just say that Hazoret is the most powerful of the God Eternals, though.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
And on the subject of win conditions, I think I'm
still sad about no Hazarets and Dying Fury, but that's so far off topic.
Same.
Right,
God,
yes.
Same. But to keep us on track, the win conditions of control, I think, follow that idea of most of your win conditions follow being a good card generally over being just a way to win the game. And I think that's even true of like the more combo win conditions that control decks might have, especially like Tainted Pact and Thassa's Oracle, which Tainted Pact in the decks where you're using it is still a good card on its own. And frankly, control decks should be still playing that even if they weren't playing the combo itself, because Tainted Pact is just a good card that acts like a demonic tutor at instant speed.
There are some caveats, but I'll agree with you mostly.
Yeah, there's some caveats. It's not a direct analog, but Tainted Pact still has a lot of efficient uses outside of just trying to get a Thassa's Oracle and win with that. But also, it has the benefit of being able to turn a game that you have already done the work to win into a victory screen by taking, okay, I've got all of the card advantage and mana advantage in the world. I have won this game on pretty much all accounts. Now I can turn this into an actual win because I have a regrowth of some kind in my hand, so I can buy back the Tainted Pact, or I have a demonic tutor to find the Thassa's Oracle, and from there, you have already won the game, and you are proving that by just playing a combo that turns that into a victory screen with the most efficiency.
Because, sometimes a Tainted Pact deck will just have the full combo and do it really early on because that was the draw they were given. It's no different in my eyes than, say, the absolute, blazing fast start from an aggro deck or blazing fast start from a ramp deck, right? Turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 ramp, turn 3 I'm playing Vorinclex.
Yeah.
Those sort of high rolls, it just gives that potential to a control deck. But if a control deck is being given 2 unpressured tutors, honestly, that game has been lost anyway. Even without them getting Tainted Pact Oracle, two pressures without being under duress. Sorry, two tutors not under duress will often win the game, no matter what they're playing in the rest of their deck. Honestly, and that actually goes to an interesting point that I want to talk about, which is control decks that get their density instead of by additional copies of cards, but instead additional copies of tutors for cards. So while, say, a black-based control deck, really you have 3 Wrath-like effects that you're okay playing. Crux of Fate, Languish, and the Neat Hook Massacre, right? Those are kind of the 3 that fit. There's other ones, but they're not bad. They're usually pretty inefficient. So if you want extra copies of good Wraths, you may not want to go into like a Yanni's Expertise, and instead just get an additional tutor, a copy of Grim Tutor or Demonic Bargain. The 3-mana one from
3-mana Exile the top 13.
Yeah. 3-mana one from some set recently. I don't remember it.
Or if you're happening to look at the same set and are in black and green and want to do that, you can use Dig Up,
Yeah, Dig Up. So just copies of tutors, and I understand that adds additional cost onto your tutors, onto your Wraths, but when you need a Wrath, you're kind of willing to pay whatever cost it asks, right?
And as a control deck, you're more often able to pay that cost.
Indeed.
Than because an aggro deck doesn't have, 2 extra mana to spare on turn 3 to play out something that wins the game. They need to just have something that wins the game.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 mana is the difference between surviving and not.
Yes,
but for a control deck, 2 mana is only a huge number in the first 3 turns of a game. And once you have stabilized in some form as the control deck, you are able to spend more mana because you are acquiring mana advantage and card advantage throughout the game.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that your tutors don't have to be that Wrath. Instead, you can tutor for whatever other card you're playing that is applicable within the matchup you're in. So while yes, they are not, a 5-mana version of whatever you're trying to play, the versatility of a tutor, especially in a combo control deck that is going to be playing a bunch of extra tutors, is one of the benefits of that type of deck, where you have sort of these slots you can put like a single card in your deck, and as opposed to some other builds of decks in Gladiator, you're going to fairly consistently be able to test the metal of that card, because you have the tutors, because you're able to evaluate whether or not it's a thing that is worth tutoring for. That's a silver bullet inherently should be something that you're willing to pay an extra 2, extra 4 mana to go find, because it is that powerful in the situation.
Yeah, just a control deck doesn't really fight on the axis of mana as much as other decks, which gives it the flexibility to use card slots that act as a myriad other card slots.
Mm-hmm.
So your demonic tutor in a deck is not just an extra copy of, or is not just a copy of a tutor. It's an extra copy of all of the best answers in your deck, or all of the best ways to close out a game in your deck.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that control can really find enjoyment from is a more synergy-based sort of list, where the cogs are turning just even as you're starting your development. I'm talking about, more like a Grixis version of control that's using like Blitz of the Thunder Raptor as a piece, and the sort of more spells based controls that use like Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, the War of the Spark one. I don't remember the name. And like Saheeli, Young Pyromancer, the sort of my win condition is getting something that cares about my spell cast and then casting a bunch of spells to keep you from doing things. Hey, I got the name right. So
yeah, I love these kind of pyromancer effects that just allow you to stabilize in two different ways at the same time. They are some of my favorite cards in Magic from a design standpoint, and also work really well against, say, an aggro opponent where you have to fight them on both the quality of individual creatures and also the quality of their board as a whole. And you can do both at the same time with these effects.
Let me ask a question I don't know the answer to. Do you play Puppet Stitcher in Control?
I haven't. I don't think people do at the moment. I don't know whether you should.
I think
the tokens don't block, and that's one of the things that the token creation kind of is used for.
That's the main issue for me, is that they just don't actually block for you, which is a big part of your Pyromancer effects.
I think Puppet Stitcher is a perfectly good Pyromancer effect, but if you're playing it, you're not playing a control deck, really, at that point. You're usually playing a much more like blitz-focused deck where you're trying to kill your opponent rather than trying to stave off your opponent while also taking care of their other threats.
Yes. And, while I do say they can't block, they do kind of block. The Puppet Factory makes it such they remove the cannot block part of the decayed tokens.
Yeah.
But that seems like so many hoops to jump through when you could just play a not 3-mana 2/3.
Yeah. Pun absolutely intended. The flip side of that is that I don't want to have to lose a creature in order to make my Pyromancer work.
It's also the Pyromancer that you lose.
Yeah. It's this very double-edged sword.
You stop it.
No.
Yes. Stop it.
UFO, why are you flipping out?
Remember Experimental Overload?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Love that card to bits.
Core card of my old Grixis control lists, which spawned from a theory that I put to test with IKEA Gun. You don't get to know what that means.
IKEA Gun. Don't
explain it.
That gives me good memories. We'll explain it eventually, just not this week.
No, we're not explaining it this week. So, if you maybe you remember what IKEA Gun does, but it was quite the thing, and ended up with this interesting Grixis sort of spells matters tokens list using Experimental Overload and Invade the City as like the two kind of big win conditions, as opposed to trying to do other things. Because if you just amass a little bit early on and then you cast and Invade the City, you effectively given your Invade the City haste.
Yeah.
Which honestly was a really big threat back in the day, and probably could still be a pretty big threat, all things considered.
I mean, it's a big threat, but it doesn't really have any other
staying power.
Yeah, staying power, and in a format where we, because IKEA Gun was before Strixhaven, before we got the best removal and kind of the most universal removal we've ever gotten.
Yes. Like, you know what also came with Strixhaven? And I have not seen a single... I'm sure I've seen it in a deck list. Body of Research.
Oh, yeah, it's a card that I'm...
No. We talked about that
Research
card.
is such a sad story.
We talked about that card. 80/80, and it's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's because it came out at the same time as Swords to Plowshares.
I mean, that's entirely true.
Yeah.
But also,
which is such a... Like, how...
But now I have Kodama the West
play
Tree.
A 6-mana 80/80, and even like the green-blue decks don't, because, you know, there's not a slot for it.
Yeah.
But like, Kodama the West Tree's here now because it's trample. we can make it work. We can make it work.
Someday I will Mizzix Mastery a Body of Research to fling it.
I think I was the person who put Body of Research onto that list.
Yeah,
I was.
Absolutely were.
That is incorrect.
Was it you?
It was me.
Oh. Really?
Yep.
Well,
I wanted to play it with Fling.
Yeah.
I still want to play it with Fling.
Someday.
Look at how far we've come as a format. Now we only think about Kazul's Fury.
Well, Thud as well.
Thud, yeah.
Thud. What a good
Now we
name.
only think about Kazul's Fury.
I mean, that is true. That's the only Fling I play at the moment.
Yeah.
In any deck, and for a long time.
Yeah.
You know,
I
for
miss
instance,
the days when Mono Red played Thud.
Yeah, and for instance, talking about just the power of MDFCs, in like a Simic or Sultai sort of control tempo-y sort of deck, regrowths are definitely a very important angle to approach the game, especially in Sultai, in my opinion. Using your regrowths to regrow removal, whether that be sweepers or otherwise, is extremely powerful and very useful.
Yeah, I have seen players get back Blood on the Snow with a regrowth. Actually, I think I've seen UFO do that.
Hello.
A lot.
Just less Blood in the Snow now, more Crux of Fate and Languish, because Blood in the Snow is 6 mana, and that's a little bit too much for the current state of things. But I was so stoked for Blood in the Snow to be printed, because it was the first not numbers-based Wrath in black, and it made my Sultai control decks actually able to kill things that were more than 4 toughness.
I remember the days of Blood in the Snow being the best Black Wrath we had.
Mm-hmm. It was so good.
I wanted to say I remember
honestly,
the days of Languish being playable.
Languish is still playable.
Languish is still playable.
But yeah, that's the thing. I still see Languish being played, and I've had more cases recently where Languish has been played frankly mistakenly, then I've seen it played and be super useful. Granted, I've not been playing mono white.
How are you mistaking someone playing Languish?
Languish is what
when I'm playing like red green legends and all of my creatures are X5s.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Just get them at that point.
Yeah,
that's like the point. But yeah,
I passed the turn on a board full of, you know, enormous creatures, and they're like looking at this Languish and like, this is the only Wrath I have in hand.
See, Languish is one thing. The other thing I've seen is Yeheni's Expertise, and that one's even more painful to see with.
I do want to say I have been playing Yeheni's Expertise lately, and that's only because it's a good sweeper for Paradox.
I mean, it's not.
I understand that.
Bad per se.
But there's two different ways to whiff on this card. Sorry, go ahead.
It's not. I don't think it's like bad to be playing Yeheni's Expertise, especially with mono white being the biggest aggro deck right now. Because like I will take any way I can to kill a Danto Vanguard. Thank you.
Honestly.
Yeah.
God, a Danto. But it's very easy for this to just not do enough.
Mm-hmm. And when it doesn't actually cast another spell, then you're really sad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I honestly can't relate.
Well, you see, Yaha's expertise is good in a deck that wants to cast 3-mana rocks that are too terrible to even consider gaming. But when your hand's full of actually good counter spells, Yaha's expertise is kind of useless.
That just don't play it in decks with good cards.
Seismic went for the skill issue angle, and UFO just threw it right back at them.
A little bit of banter.
Legitimately,
though, I do like the.
All I'm saying is that giving us damnation would solve this issue.
Yes,
Watsy,
yes, it would.
For the third time this stream, hire me already.
Yeah, but like, Yaha's expertise is very useful as just this sort of survive for like a turn or two longer sort of stopgap and do a little bit of development while you're at it, which is exactly what a deck like Artifact-based Paradox Engine would want. We're not yet at a point that is more than just a deck name as opposed to an archetype, so to speak. But it's definitely getting closer with a lot of things coming out, the more early ramp or otherwise that we have access to in the colors of blue and black, because it's at base a Dimir deck and then has other things you can add into it.
Yeah, I think Paradox combo control is really what it is. Just almost ignoring the control part.
Yes.
Is a deck, one of those weird decks where it's probably just as good in most color combinations, in the sense that once you have a certain number of colors, you'll have everything anyway. And I think talking about Paradox is probably a good point to talk about combo control done poorly. And I realize that this is a self-burn.
My decks.
Yeah, but it's also a burn of UFO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I resemble that comment.
Yeah.
So there's two ways to do combo control. And I've found in my experience that there's one way to do it that's very incorrect. And that is, how can I word this? Density-based combo combined with control. If you remember back in the annals of history for Gladiator, there used to be a blue-white omniscience deck that was going around a little bit. That is a density-based combo deck where you're just looking to have a density of draw spells such that omniscience is able to win in some way because you've drawn your deck and then you can win. But because it's a density-based deck, if you do anything to offset that balance, like play less divinations, you are at a risk of completely toppling the tower that you've created in the control and the combo side, even if you're sacrificing most of your control aspects. So density-based is kind of, it's not impossible to do as a control hybrid, but it definitely has its issues because you need a density of effect. It's in the name.
And I think that density-based combos, as someone who has made a lot of decks that look density-based, at least in paper, I think they've gotten much better with the advent of tutors that are a lot more universal. Because
tutors that are a lot more tutors.
Because previously, if you wanted to build, a deck that focused around omniscience and creating some loop after that, you didn't have enough tutors in the format to warrant playing for at the beginning of the format. You didn't warrant playing black. So you just focused on your density of draw spells. And now I think the reason a deck like Paradox has any chance of surviving a game, that the reason it can do that is because most of its cards are bad, but there are a certain subset of its cards, much more so than there was before Strixhaven came out, that turn those bad cards into a win.
Or a Dark Ritual.
Yeah.
I would harken back to the deck that I won with yesterday, the sort of Sultai Emergent Ultimatum channel deck. That deck started off as a 5-color deck with the only black card in it being a single copy Wishcall Talisman. It was 5-color Omniscience ? And at the time, it was decently winning because it was very good at grinding, and that's what was happening. And it's kind of shaped itself into a very different beast since. Speaking of wraths that we've forgotten about, do you remember that Solar Blaze is a card that exists?
I sure do, and
I haven't thought about it in so long.
Okay, so I've been playing a lot of mono black aggro in the past few months. Actually, in the past year.
Phyrexian Obliterator, I assume.
Yeah. Phyrexian Obliterator, when it was previewed as coming onto Arena, the big talk about it was, this card's great, but you'll have a game where you look at your opponent's board state. They're playing mountains, plains, and sweepers in some capacity. You still play the Phyrexian Obliterator, and then you lose because your opponent, for some reason, was playing Solar Blaze.
I mean,
and
more honestly,
I have not seen a Solar Blaze cast.
And more honestly, they're going to be playing Justice Strike, which is an actually playable card.
A more playable card.
Forgot that card existed too.
But it's actually playable, in my opinion. It's not excessively playable.
I think it's
actually
still
playable.
Honestly, I think it's still legitimately playable in one deck, and that deck,
Control?
In 2 decks, and those decks are Boros Control, where you don't really have the blue inclusive removal to have enough good removal, frankly, that you need to be using Justice Strike. Or because you're playing another bad deck that's kind of a density-based combo control deck, which is 5-color Niv range. But that's a beast I don't want to talk about right now.
You could also play it in like a Brash Taunter deck, because you have a bunch of things that like to take damage, and Justice Strike sort of works there. It doesn't actually work there.
Let me check if Dabnado is in the chat.
I have given the siren call.
Okay. Not to step on Dabnado's toes or anything, but Brash Taunter is bad. And not just as like a card, but I think as like a deck archetype as a whole. And I think that Dabnado said that at some point. I just wanted to reiterate and make sure we're all on the same page.
I mean, so is Channel, and yet I've built an entire deck around it and grinded my ability to play it up to being able to get a 4-1.
So the thing there is that channel has like some capacity to be good outside of a singular card.
Fair.
And I think that some of the cards that you're playing with channel are good cards anyway. And Star of Extinction is not a good card.
I have convinced myself to play more good cards recently. I made a switch in my deck to no longer play Obnixilis and Peer into the Abyss, which is my baby, and I am sad to lose. But I still and never will cut from my Sultai deck Triumphant Reckoning, I think it's called.
Yeah.
6 white.
Yes, I love this card.
I think I've hard cast it once in the deck.
And to bring us back on track, cards like these look terrible. And frankly, they are. They're almost as bad as Thassa's Oracle. But they represent almost a showing off that a control player has won the game somehow, like has won the game in some aspect. And that can be in the case of like Triumphant Reckoning in looking at an aggro opponent and saying, you let me play this card and haven't killed me by the time I'm able to play it.
Well, I mean, that's
so you shouldn't be winning.
Your use of the card. That's like your opinion, man. I just cast off of Emergent Ultimatum because it's the best. It is the most lean emergent pile that isn't absolutely terrible.
I agree. And that's kind of what I'm saying, in that like you're looking at an aggro opponent and saying, you let me get to 7 mana. So die?
And just to give a little bit of clarity here, Emergent Ultimatum being able to find 3 differently named monocolored cards from your deck, and you cast 2 of them, your opponent chooses which one you don't cast. So you get Omniscience, Triumphant Reckoning, and Final Parting. Such that it's a little bit... You always
get Omniscience, yeah.
And like honestly, it's a little bit of a scummy Emergent Ultimatum pile, because if your opponent doesn't understand that the Omniscience is coming and puts the Omniscience back, you actually just win on the spot no matter what your hand is, because you Final Parting, put Omniscience into the graveyard and tutor once. And I am very much of the opinion that an Emergent Ultimatum deck and an Omniscience deck should be able to win on the turn that Emergent Ultimatum and thus Omniscience hits the battlefield instantly. Like one tutor plus Omniscience should be a win, because it's really easy to make it a win.
And with that line specifically, it's just, if you actually think about it, it's just always correct to put Final Parting back, because sometimes they won't have another way to instantly win. They will,
though notably putting Final Parting back makes it such, funnily enough, that a counterspell doesn't stop Omniscience anymore.
Yeah.
Because you try and counter the Omniscience, and the Omniscience goes to the graveyard, and then the Triumphant Reckoning resolves, and the Omniscience comes back.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, honestly. It's also a cool way, especially if your hand is full of instant speed draw or otherwise. You leave the Triumphant Reckoning on the stack and cast your instant speed effects, which sort of protects your Omniscience and also allows you to potentially like bin a Planeswalker or something and get its ability.
Now I kind of want to see a line. I don't know how it'd be used, but using Krosan Grip's Split Second, or I guess we also have the Edict from Modern Horizons 2 that also has Split Second.
Okay.
And using that as the last spell you cast off of Emergent Ultimatum to make the remaining spell that you're actually casting. Oh, wait, no, it's still counterable. Never mind.
Yeah, it's still
I'm
counterable. Split second doesn't work in the way you hope it would. I mean,
sadness.
You can throw like a Veil of Summer in.
Yeah,
like that still works.
That card still exists.
Speaking of control, some people start playing Veil of Summer as control just gets more more prevalent. And really, the interesting thing about Veil of Summer is that I find it to be fairly inoffensive as an inclusion, especially in a deck that also has Uro in it. Where sometimes just paying 1 green mana and putting a card in the bin is good enough because you're able to cast your Uro now.
You can just cycle it sometimes and it's like fine.
Yeah, and there's also some decks that just randomly are playing like a dual colored spell, like against mono green, you'll hit a Fiend Artisan and draw a card sometimes.
Did you know that Luris is a black card?
Yeah, Luris is a black card. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not like entirely dead, it's mostly dead. But it's not entirely dead.
Occasionally it will sometimes have cycling for a green. And occasionally in other times it'll be the best spell in your deck. Because it's Cryptic Command.
This card, Why does this card do the things that it does?
It's a weird card and I love it. And as much as I derail this episode into talking about combo instead of control,
this really isn't the control episode.
I really love control as an archetype. And yeah, I think for the people that we are here, we're combo players first.
Yeah.
Like maybe mid-range players second, and then we're control players.
I've played it all, like honestly.
Yeah,
my description,
whatever.
Whenever I hit like a top 8 or any sort of like seeded event in this format, literally anyone I talked to who's facing me was like, "Oh yeah, no, you're a wild card. I do not know what you're bringing." Like,
yeah.
For example, I brought 4-colored Jescalia as like the first time I was like playing the deck to a top 8.
Right.
Yeah.
I forgot that was a thing that existed.
That's what I love about you, UFO, is that you will play an entire season on one deck and then
just show up to a finals with whatever nonsense. Deck,
ostensibly for the first time, at least the first time in a like actual competitive setting, and still do surprisingly well.
Yeah, it's just, I like playing Magic. I don't really care what I'm playing.
Yeah, like I have built so many decks the night before or the day of a weekly, and then just somehow gone 3-2 with them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's what I did with Zombie Hunt the one time I went 2-3 with Zombie Hunt in Gladiator.
Oh, right. You went 2-3 with Zombie Hunt.
You nearly went 3-2.
I nearly went 3-2.
You were facing me.
I did win. I won 5 games and went 2-3 with a deck that should have won max 1 game.
Yeah, you took it to game 3 against me back in summer 2020.
That's
those were good times.
Yeah,
just shocked about how bad the Emergent Ultimatum combo deck was back then.
Yeah, this really is a 2020 nostalgia stream,
deck,
which is not a thing I expect to ever say again about 2020.
I mean,
and
the Gladiator games I played in 2020 were very good.
Gladiator was definitely a highlight of that year.
Despite how much less powerful Gladiator was 2 years ago, it's been just as fun throughout the whole thing.
It's changed a ton, but it hasn't like gotten boring.
Bring back Brant Reclamation, just like go all the way back.
Oh, I might actually sleeve that up next weekly.
Now, I don't think
I'm around next week, but whenever I can.
Violet, what about this offer? My current deck versus an exact copy of a Band Reclamation deck you found from 2020.
Maybe 2021.
Well, yeah, but pre-bannings.
Yeah.
Oh, pre-bannings?
Oh.
Oh.
Back when you could play really good Teferi.
Back when you could play, 3 mana Teferi.
And that was the good card that you could play in the deck.
Are we doing back to Teferi ban, or are we going far enough for Field of the Dead?
Probably.
I mean, honestly, I'd say go crazy.
I actually kind of want to see that now.
I actually want to see you grabbing a list from pre-field ban and then not replacing, just adding Oko to it. Just adding Oko Thief of Crowns to it.
Is Swords to Plowshares better than these?
Yeah. Does Swords to Plowshares make Oko fair? The answer is no.
No.
But I think that's still be very concept. And with that, I think we are sufficiently off the rails that we can go so far off the rails we're going into the end of the episode.
Yeah, just crashing into the craft corner.
Yeah. Do we have anyone has anything prepped for the craft corner?
Well, I went last week, so I can't go.
I haven't thought about it at all.
I can pull something out right now, and that card is Chatterfang Squirrel General.
Okay.
This card is... Honestly, if you put me into a position where I need to think of a card for Craft Corner fairly quickly, I'm just gonna give you like red and or green 3-drops all the time.
They're legends.
Most of the time they're legends. Chatterfang Squirrel General is 3 mana for a 3/3 with Forest Walk. It's legendary, and it also, anytime you'd make a token, you also make that many 1/1 squirrel tokens as well. And it has this activated ability for a single black and sacrifice X squirrels to give a creature +X -X until end of turn. This card, and it comes up way too often
in a Gruul deck that doesn't play black lands.
I play this card. Its primary use case is in a Gruul deck that plays 0 lands that tap for black.
I mean, arguably you should be playing the Pathways, but you know.
Well, I mean, Pathways are bad in that context. Like, actually,
no, you're right. The Pathways aren't what you would play, but like,
I like having as many basics as possible in that deck, especially now with that we have Kadama of the West Tree.
Oh, right, Kadama, yeah. But
legitimately, I find all of my basics.
Yeah.
Oh and God, World Tree.
Back on this card, though.
Yeah.
Having just the ability to, if you've made a treasure at any point in the game, which it turns out red and green are really good at making treasures or having ways to make any color of mana just coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn any one of your value engines that's just been creating tokens through the game into removal spells in a red-green mid-range deck.
Fairly efficient removal as well.
Yeah, efficient removal that almost all the time doesn't actually cost you a card.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just costing you tokens that you were already making that's just bonus on top of this 3/3 that is a good amount of the time unblockable.
Mm-hmm.
Especially against control. If I'm playing against a deck that has Tainted Pact in its list, this usually is unblockable. Just because
you'll see like a Triome.
You'll see Triomes, yeah. And you'll see the off-color Triome, and if it's an off-color Triome in a 2-color deck, chances are it probably includes green. So Chatterfang is just
soon.
This, yeah. Like, if I'm facing up against Grixis, or if I'm facing up against like blue-red, and not blue-red, black-red, and they're playing a Tainted Pact. They're probably also playing Junderdome. And that means that Chatterfang's unblockable. This card's just so... Every aspect of it is a little bit more pushed than I expect. And it just makes this card always relevant in some way. And the absolute hilarity of going Chatterfang into a Garruk Unleashed to make an extra token into a Vivian Monsters Advocate to just start spitting out Squirrel tokens every turn and making an unblockable creature huge. It's just absolutely hilarious and very powerful, it turns out. Because
also, question for you, Seismic. How many times have you insta-ulted Garruk Unleashed with Klex in that deck?
I don't run Vorinclex in Red Green Legends anymore.
It's a legend.
It is a 6-drop as well. I have completely cut out 6-drops from the deck.
I am surprised.
The deck, it turns out, is... I could see myself going back to 6-drops eventually. Not right now, but eventually. And if I did that, like, I'd be including like Kogla and Vorinclex probably at the same time.
Yeah, I find personally that I play exactly one 6-drop, and that 6-drop is Klex.
Yeah, and I've just found myself when I have
go ahead.
When I have that much mana, I always find myself having enough stuff to do with it already. And when I don't have that much mana, every time I've been in that situation, it's been very painful for me to see a Kogla or a Vorinclex come out of the top of my deck.
Yeah.
Counterpoint, though. People are playing a bunch of sagas now.
True.
I hear you, UFO. Also, people are playing a lot of mono white right now. And so I like to go fast.
But if you get a Quacks out against mono white and most of their growth spells don't work anymore.
Some of their growth spells don't work anymore. The biggest hit is that then they can still, because they're playing white, just
remove
swords
it. Yes,
it.
I know. That's like the whole issue of white.
Yeah, good old swords to plowshares.
But yeah, like, turns out creatures that are effectively unblockable and also do a lot of other stuff just really good.
I'm here for it.
And you know what's also been really good? The time that at least I've had during this episode of the Gladiator podcast.
Such a blast.
Before we leave, can I just say, can we get this Swords to Plowshares art on Arena? Just like,
I didn't know that existed, and
that was in a secret lair drop like 2 times ago. It was like an Art Deco sort of thing.
Yeah, I remember seeing the style for stuff, but I didn't realize Swords was one. God, that art is very pretty. Ooh, yeah.
Maybe someday.
So, our love for art aside, my heart is open to everyone who has been here and otherwise wants to support the stream, either by following, subscribing if you're crazy, going to the Patreon if you're even crazier, and just generally engaging with the content, because that is all we want.
And that also includes on YouTube, where when we upload episodes just like this one, going to YouTube, engaging with those, we are super thankful for that. We're also thankful for the folks that support us financially, whether that is through patreon.com or through subscribing here on Twitch. If you want to stay updated on what the Gladiator podcast is doing, then you can go to our Discord to do such and talk with us, the members of the Gladiator podcast and of Second Right Productions as a whole.
And that is also where, if you are within the Patreon, you'll see a decent amount of the benefit. So one of the big benefits currently of the Patreon being the question and answer section that may be coming soon TM to these live streams.
And I think that's all the plugs that we have.
I mean, I got a bunch more around me, but they're not really for this.
Okay, then. In light of that, I guess I've been Seismic Lawns.
I've been UFO.
I've been Violet Blight.
And this has been the Gladiator podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Bye.
So Good and Plenty is a brand of, it's calling itself licorice candy, and I kind of want to cast doubt on that, just because I think if you're smaller than like a stick of licorice, you really don't count as like a licorice product, just like in my eyes. And also just I feel betrayed because I have had this thought in my head that it's connected to like the Mike and Ike's brand this entire time.